Grace, peace, and mercy from God, the Father of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I have a special treat today, something that I rarely get to do, and that's have a dialogue sermon with someone. So I was going to pick one of you people out of the audience here to come up and have a dialogue sermon. How about you, young man? You here? Would you come on up and have a dialogue sermon with me?
Something like that.
Well, come on up here. Let me introduce you. This is my good friend, John Calhoun, who's been in the ministry 40 years. He's been my boss and my mentor. He was the minister of Manhattan Beach Community Church. And we're going to share today's sermon together. Come on up, John. Give you a second to get situated here. Okay. Today's gospel is about selling everything and giving alms to the poor. So we're going to pass out the offering plate today. So I want Rolex watches, car keys, cell phones, wallets, checkbooks, everything in there today, because we're going to be obedient to Christ, right? Well, that may or may not be what he's talking about here, because back in the days of Jesus, just like the days of today, people were obsessed with their things. And they didn't have a lot, they had a little bit. But even in their vineyards, they had 24-hour watches in their vineyards. They had a shepherd's union of people watching sheep so the sheep wouldn't get taken away. They did their best. They didn't have burglar alarms, but they did their best, and things still got away from them. And they were obsessed with their thinking so much that it took away from the relationship with God. Being in a ministry is kind of that thing, because we are entrusted with a flock, with people's souls, and it kind of keeps us awake at night. I don't know if you've ever laid awake at night, John, thinking about your flock. Never. Okay. But on occasion we do, and John's been in the ministry and probably knows more about the South Bay, about more than dealing with people's problems than anybody I've ever met. We've been in close contact. We've been friends for 15 years. John has been my boss, and I'm going to let you tell a little bit about how his church was unique and how it influenced a lot of people's lives in the South Bay. John was born up in Bellingham, or spent a great deal of time up in Bellingham, Washington. A lot of you folks know the area up in Washington. And John himself has been, well, he hasn't had the easy road of a pastor. His dad was a pastor. He had tragedy in his personal life and has made it through that. He's overcome years and years and obstacles of the usual pitfalls in ministry, and is able to come out of it as a winner and a leader, and someone that I greatly admire. John, tell us a little bit about your beginning ministry and how that all started.
Well, I had to go to church. My father was a minister. And when I was about 7 or 8, I said to my father, do I have to go to church this Sunday? And my father, who was a very pleasant soul, looked at me and said, heavens no, only if you want lunch. I grew up in the ministry. My father was a congregational minister up in the state of Washington. He was in the same church for 21 years. I was at the Manhattan Beach Community Church for 40 years. Many people have wondered how I could have been the senior minister of the Manhattan Beach Community Church for 40 years. Well, as it turns out, the Manhattan Beach Community Church never wanted a senior minister, and I'd been the closest thing to that they'd ever had, and they didn't want to lose me. So I stayed in one church for 40 years while Ken was wandering in the Lutheran wilderness. And then we got very lucky, because Ken and Barbie and Jordan Gilbert, that's one of your sons, Tyler and Jolene just lived up the street from the church. And Ken and Barbie and the family were holding forth in the valley. And so they walked down to church. The church finally gave him a day off after 5 years, was it? And they walked down the street to our church and sat down in the pew and did what you people do every Sunday. And on the way out, they shook my hand and so on, and told me what they were about. And I said, well, why don't you stop by and we'll have a visit? And 5 years later, Ken and the family had been very much a part of our Manhattan Beach Community Church. And we were very grateful to have them. I don't know if you know how much talent this fellow has. First of all, he has one of the best speaking voices in the ministry. Secondly, and I wanted him to do this instead of me speaking this morning, he's a very good jazz pianist also, and I hope you'll get him to play at some point. Moses, you can encourage him, and you're a good one yourself. But he used to play, and I used to pray and speak to the congregation, and we had a grand old time. And probably that's more than you wanted to know about any of that. But incidentally, we have spent time talking to one another this week, and what really came up in our minds, would we have been better preachers all these years if we'd been on steroids? Now, Ken is more lively than I am. First your mind goes, and then your balance begins to bother you, and various things. But Ken was the associate at the church for 5 years, and you won't find a more generous family, and I am thrilled to death that Ken found his way to Resurrection Lutheran. I'm thrilled for Ken and Barbie and the kids, and they're not kids anymore. And I'm thrilled for this church, because I think that given the opportunity in the course of time, and you've had a year with him already, that very wonderful things will happen in this congregation with the Johnson family and Ken as your pilot here. So having said that, I look forward to being here next Sunday at 4 o'clock for Ken's installation as the senior minister, and I look forward to getting to know some of you better at the reception that follows.
And one of the things that John did that is probably unheard of in most places is he broke the religion barrier, because on staff we had John as a congregational minister. We had a minister named Ray Lambert, who was a Disciples of Christ minister. We had myself, I was holding down the Lutheran for it, and we also had a rabbi on staff as a minister. And how did all that come to be?
Well, when I first came here, I looked around. I had come from New England, one of those little white churches with steeples, and we had the last bell ever cast by the Paul Revere Company in the church that I served in New England. And when I came to Manhattan Beach, I looked around, and I'd never lived in the suburbs before, and I wondered, what could we do to attract people? And the first thing that came to my mind was that we needed to get people from all walks of life, regardless of their religious background or any background at all. And so we really became an interdenominational and an interfaith church over those 40 years. And we had all the staff. We had Presbyterians, we had Lutherans, we had the dreaded Methodists. We had a bunch of Methodists. I know they're across the street saying pleasant things about us this morning, right?
Right.
And we had a little bit of everybody, and I met Rabbi Kahane, who was holding forth up the hill at Temple Menorah, and we started doing interfaith stuff together. And then the great revelation came when I discovered that rabbis don't work on Sundays. And so I started having him come to preach and to do the early morning lecture series, and he brought his choir and his cantor. And that first cantor was very interesting. My choir director said he sings off key, which I thought was interesting. And Of course, I'm not a musician, and really I didn't think I could ever go into the ministry because my father played all kinds of instruments. He sang, he could sit down at the piano and play anything you could think of. And I thought to be a minister, you had to be a musician. Well, you're lucky you got a musician in addition to a minister, and he can do about anything imaginable. But so we had a rabbi, Rabbi Kahane. He became a member of the staff when he retired. He said, "What will I do when I retire?" We became very good friends. I said, "Leon," I said, "you're going to become a Christian rabbi." And he was for 16 years a member of our staff. He preached on a regular basis. He was one of the best teachers in the area. He spoke 12 languages. He lived through the Holocaust. His whole family was obliterated, and he heard the shot that killed his brother in the woods in Poland, and watched many, many people marched off, and his wife as well was a lovely person. And so we ushered them in. About the time Ken was at the church, he was there from 1997 to 2002, and of course that brings us to 9/11, which we shared together, and Ken gave one of the really inspiring messages during that period of time that I recall very well. So we had many people come to the church. I would say we had in that church, and I am retired now, we had, I would say, a fifth of everybody in that church was a former Catholic. And we had one of the two presiding bishops come from Los Angeles, who I'd known many years before. And he came. He was the first Catholic priest ever to preach at the Manhattan Beach Community Church. And he came after he became a bishop. I didn't think he would come, but he did. And Ken was there, and we all went to lunch. And the one thing we learned from the bishop was that the Pope isn't running the Vatican.
I think you're right. John, you've made it through your own trials and tribulations of your life and your family and all the things that go on with ministry. A couple comes into your office and they sit down and say, "We're having troubles and we just seem to be worrying and just trying to make ends meet." And how do you make it in this modern world where there's just so many things coming at you? We're trying to be spiritual. We're trying to be a Christians, and you know, we got to put food on the table. We got to pay for the college bills. We got to put our kids through school. We got car payments and house payments, and how do you get people to let go of that and trust in God? I mean, what do you just kind of tell people in situations like that?
Well, one thing I think is important, and I like what I have read about your church and what Ken has said. One of the earliest things we did was put together a Christian counseling center at our church, and we brought in a lot of people to the church eventually, and we lived through the McMartin mess that some of you will remember, and that was a really difficult time. But we had low-cost counseling, or counseling at any level, and we had an intern program where we had counselors there. So anybody in the church that had a problem or who had a concern, in the early days, the ministers really spent time talking to people, and I did, obviously, as Ken would do. But it was a relief to be able to send people to very competent, certified marriage, family, and counselor. What's the MF? Yeah. They changed it all, you know. But the bottom line was, it was a comfort to be able to send people, no matter what their situation, for really good help. And I think in my own mind, yes, I spoke to a lot of people, and the bottom line, the rabbi had something to say, which I always thought was interesting. I asked him what the most important thing in the 23rd Psalm was. And the rabbi said, one word is important. And I said, what's the one word? I've never heard that before. And he said, you know that phrase, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The most important word in that phrase and in that entire psalm is the word walk. Yea, though I walk through it, not sit in the valley, not go dead in the valley, not just be there, but to keep on walking through the valley of the shadow. And that's the greatest secret to life, I think, if you're in hot, holy water and your world is seemingly pretty overwhelming. It is the ability to keep walking and to keep on keeping on. And that's the most important thing you can do. Once you go dead in the water, once you give up, once you sit down, once you pull the bedclothes over your head, you're pretty much done. And that's where friendship is so important, and in a church it's so very important that people help you to walk, and the good Lord helps us to walk.
Right. John, you've been a friend for our family for 15 years. You've helped us through a lot of different situations. I caught him on a car phone. I think you were in Idaho when we talked last time, or Wyoming, or some crazy place up there out roaming in the Wild West. And I said, John, if possible, come here and just share with us a little bit about your life. We talk on the phone, and our conversations last about an hour, and that's just talking about catching up. But we could be here days talking about John's incredible ministry and life. And so I just wanted to take a moment of time and share my best friend with you guys, and I appreciate you coming, John. And
Can I tell one very quick story about your family?
this is how it goes on, right?
All right, very quickly. When the Johnsons came, the children were small. Now they're three of the most accomplished young people that I know, and three of the finest young people I know, and I'm not exaggerating. And their littlest, who is Jordan Gilbert Johnson, was at the church all the time, and I got to know him, and I was at the house and so forth, and we became good friends, I thought. And he was about 6 years old then, and our senior choir, we did a lot with contemporary music and with the choirs and so forth. And the senior choir made 4 trips to Europe, and the Johnsons, just like Barbara went off to El Salvador here, the Johnsons went on the choir tour, but the children had to stay at home, and they had provided very helpful care for them. And one afternoon, while the Johnsons were on this choir tour, Jordan came with the person that was looking after him to the church office for something. And I happened to be there, and I said, Jordan, where are your parents? And he said, they're in France. And I said, have you talked to them? And he said, no, I'm going to talk to them tonight. They're in Paris. And I said, look, Jordan, when you get on the phone, tell them that this is Jordan Gilbert. And can you say that, Jordan? He says, Jordan Gilbert, Jordan Gilbert. He keeps looking at me with this strange expression on his face. So I thought, well, whatever happens, happens, and went about my life. And so they called the Johnsons in Paris that night, and finally it was Jordan's turn to get on the phone, and he's crying, and he said, Dad, John Calhoun is trying to change my name. But that's the Johnson family. And Jordan Gilbert, he's in show business, as you know, and I said, this is the big opportunity. Change your name to Jordan Gilbert, and you'll become a star like Maurice Chevalier. Well, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I'll probably see you all next Sunday here for Ken's installation. I'm very proud and pleased to have this guy as my friend through the years, and Barbie and the family.
Great. Thank you, John. John Calhoun, everyone. Thank you. We'll receive our tithes and offerings.